My name is Sven from Westen. I'm 24 years old and I live right now in the Netherlands. And I was born and raised in a small village of the southwest of the Netherlands. And I went to school there. And then afterwards, I studied a little bit in the center of the Netherlands, and I studied fashion business management. My dad has a clothing store. It's been in our family for 102 years. So I was the fifth generation to work in that store. I'm an account manager right now. So I work for a fashion brand, a Danish fashion brand. It's a really big fashion label here in Europe. So that's what I do now. Yeah. Yeah, and how I came across the WTM at a certain point was actually through my brother Ralph, because Ralph called me at a certain point and he said, "I have the most exciting news in the world for you. The answer's been found. There's nothing like it." He went fully overboard, saying this is the best thing to ever happen to humanity. You need to call me back right now, because I didn't actually pick up. So that was the voicemail. I still have that voicemail. It's really fun to listen to sometimes. And I called him a couple of days later because I was really busy, and he eventually sat me down and talked me to the Adam the Stork story and everything. And he had already ordered the book in the first week and gotten really into it. You know, he was already halfway through it, and watched the interview 2 times, and he was really into it. And I must say, I think a lot of his enthusiasm reached me very early on. So I did understand it to some level, enough to understand the potential and feel like, I feel like there's something there. You might be onto something. And so yeah, that's a bit how I got into it through him, actually. Yeah. At a certain point, I just, through patient perseverance, kind of kept listening to the podcast and kept getting back into it. But what really did strike me, which was the most, I think, important part for me of the journey, was when I read Our Meaning, like the draft that was there. And it's like I read that 3 times in a row, and I just couldn't get enough of it. When I read that, that was like everything that was kind of just blurring around, and that I was the loose concepts that I was sort of loosely getting started to suddenly just come together and form a big whole where I started to get the whole point, and I was like, oh, that's how it all works. And that was a really magnificent point. I remember that's the moment I called Ralph and I called him, and I was like, wow, now I get it. I see how the whole thing works. I really connected the dots through that one, through reading that. So I personally resonated a lot with resignation, especially when first getting into this information, because I think when going through resignation, I was a terribly aggressive kid. I fought with my parents every day. I listened only to heavy metal music. I wore full black clothes from beginning to top, with 20 chains and the huge chunker boots and the big skulls on my shirt and all of that. And I actually used to scream out loud through the house and then bang on all my doors and bang on the walls and kick against stuff. And then a year after that, I switched around and I started to only listen to Eminem. And I wore like sweatpants every day. And I stopped going to school a lot, and I started to smoke a lot of cigarettes and even weed. And I drank a lot, and I started to use various types of drugs as well at a quite difficult age to do all of that. I remember in that time also being extremely vocal in school about everything, about all the injustice, and I used to get kicked out of class every time because I used to point out whatever I thought was bullshit out loud. So I was very loud when it came to how I used to deal with everything around me in the world. While I think other teenagers and kids around me used to be relatively quiet and just at a certain point take up everything, I was at a certain point, I stayed in that pretty long. And I was really, how do you call it, marked as the trouble kid, you know, the one that always steps out of line. And I remember my parents being extremely worried for my future, thinking that it was going to go extremely off track into the wrong direction. Which was also why when I had to resign, you know, pretty hard, because I had a really bad place to come out of, and some extremely self-destructing behavior. So it could have quite easily taken me into a really bad place if I wouldn't have found a way to deal with all of that and get my wins in. So then I kind of learned to get all my ego wins in, and I got really, really good at that. So I started to work at my dad's store, and it turned out that I was quite a good salesman. So I managed to sell more than the other people in that store on a lot of days. So that's a really good way to get your wins in, also because my parents were very proud of that. So they were all like, "Hey, you go, you're doing super well." And I was like, "Yes, I started to really become a winner at the battle of life." So then I started to do super well in school. I dropped basically all the friends I had, completely ignored them, told them that I didn't want to do anything, have to do anything with them anymore. Started to 100% turn my life around, and everybody was applauding that. It was like I left and right. I heard everybody saying how amazing I did and how surprised they were with my complete change in behavior and how positive it all was. I think that's because of how the whole world replied to that. It's just looking back on that now, I can realize, while being honestly, that wasn't actually that I wasn't actually feeling all that good that whole time. It was just I dissed a lot of my friends. I felt really guilty about that. I felt quite fake during that whole process, and I had to become really egocentric and quite a big winner to get through all of that. So it was just I think because of all of that, that whole process just started to be. I thought that was really interesting to learn the truth about that and actually be able to look back at that time and be like, oh wow, this is what really happened to me, and this is how everything went, and I've been able to give it a place because of that, and really work through that a bit to a point where I can now just yeah put that aside and not have any form of control over my life anymore, I guess. Yeah. Was I think the better way to say it, I was very fierce and competitive, especially very fierce and competitive. And the way I viewed the world was that I think on a deep subconscious level, I did very much realize that there was something wrong with the world. So I was watching a lot of people like Jordan Peterson and similar influencers and stuff on Instagram, which all kind of fiercely fight the current regime of the world. And I was very anti-leftist, which is difficult because my girlfriend is quite left, to say it like that. I had a lot of conversations as well where my girlfriend and stuff would say things like white males and toxic masculinity, and that it's such a big problem right now, and that they're mostly still responsible for all the upset and everything that went wrong in the world. And I remember just, it's extremely condemning, of course, to hear all of that. And I remember from that becoming very aggressive and ferocious and having a really hard time argumenting that because, I think you deep inside feel that their condemnation is extremely undeserved. I mean, she was, of course, right to see all the upset and stuff, and we did have some good conversations about that in that way. But I used to always have very much problem just accepting those ideals, those leftist, as they would say it, ideals of the world and of how things are the way that it is viewed a lot these days, especially in my generation. Because you felt to some aspect that it just wasn't true. So I think reading Death by Dogma was a great book for me to read because I could really put some really good understanding to why have I positioned myself this whole time, but then why again have some of the other people position themselves the exact opposite. I think that really comes about really well explained in Death by Dogma, and through that I was like, oh okay, I kind of understand how all of that worked now and why everybody's in it a bit like this, and that whole battle, just having that discussion isn't going to solve everything. That's an everlasting discussion that's only going to get worse and worse, and it's going to go deeper and deeper, and it's not going to solve anything unless you solve the core issue at hand. So yeah, over the last 2 years, to realizing how all of this works and to really taking that transformation myself now, I can just see how this shows truly how all human behavior came to be. I can sort of see how having this knowledge will, over the next couple of generations, bring about the transformed world. I can really see people being happy and people working through their upset, therapizing themselves, people being honest to each other the whole time, and just basically being like in a perpetual state of just being immensely relieved and reconciled with each other, and just this whole world that nobody's understanding, where everybody's head is basically pure chaos, just being just the sea of madness, just being like an island of sterility, basically growing up to becoming a sea of sterility. And it's just in comparison to the world now, which is just so extremely fueled with anger and egocentricity and alienation, and especially also in my generation, where I just notice so many things yeah, are not as they should be, and nobody's really truly being able to admit. So nothing is being discussed really. It's extremely superficial. Nothing is really helping, and therefore nothing changes. Even though we can all feel it's really necessary, and I can just see how all of this will bring about a truly beautifully transformed world, which is once you get that, it's a whole new realization. It's a whole new thing to fight for. It's not about you, your life, what happens next year, what you want to eat tomorrow, what you want to be in a year, but you're thinking about the completion of a 2 million year journey of the human species to a point where we get to be selfless, loving, and cooperative again, and live in cohesence with our instincts in a perpetual state of happiness. And that's just, it's a profoundly more interesting thing to live for than the things I used to live for before. Yeah. So I think right now, because the transformed state is logically a 100-degree turnaround of our current world, it's just so far away for most people from everything they live in right now. And it can be just really confronting and quite condemning to think about yourself and your upset, and to think truthfully about all of that, and about you, how everything worked for you in your whole life. And I've noticed that there's just not a lot of people around me when I try to talk to them about this information who can actually deal with this and have the potential to look inward. And therefore, just to become truly transformed and really just help realize this information is just something I feel like I can do it. And because I feel like I can do it, I feel now like I have to do it. You know, I think it's a bit like with Jeremy, when he said that the first moment he started to realize how big this problem actually is, and the moment he started to see like, oh crap, I can actually think about this and think about it honestly and confront it, and it doesn't depress the hell out of me like it does with everybody else. And then that's when he started to realize the massive importance of the fact that he then actually had to spend his time of it, because if the people who can actually confront it are not trying to confront it and deal with it, then nobody is. And that would actually mean that, we don't manage to save the world, and it just, dies from terminal alienation. And just because of how massive the impact can be of one person, if you spend your entire life focused on this, like you see with Jeremy, and then the fact that you actually have the potential to complete our 2 million year journey to enlightenment, I think it's just a step I feel like I have to take. And then when it comes down to all of that, one of the first best things to do is opening a WTM center, because that actually is one of the things I could do right now that really can help. So it's a beautiful step, and I hope in the next 5, 10, 20, I don't know, 50 years, it can be and can be a whole lot more beautiful steps. And right now, it's this one. Yeah.